Because September got here really damn fast, we've now, most of us probably, been able to see the new version of Stephen King's It, which has been highly anticipated for a while, obviously back when Cary Fukunaga was gonna do it, and everybody was talking about how they kind of really had to go for it, and Fukunaga had that kind of True Detective following that he had found prior to this, so people started to feel a little good about it, but then when it came out that he wasn't going to direct, everybody pretty much assumed this was going to be some shitty studio movie. And, and just kind of the same generic horror shit we've been getting. And then as things started to unravel, people started to get really damn excited, and for good reason, and I would like to think that those people aren't going to be disappointed. I know that I wasn't. I'm really familiar with the story. I've had this book for what feels like forever, and I've been through the whole thing at least a couple of times, as well as I think I know every single word to the miniseries at this point. I've seen it so many times, regardless of its length. And the thing about that is, the whole fact that this is now like a gory R-rated movie that's got all this stuff in it that wasn't featured in the miniseries that's in here, it's become very, very popular these days to talk about what a piece of shit the miniseries is. Which is, and a lot of people like to assume that it's nostalgia and all that. I really don't think it's that. I feel like if I personally was going to see any particular shittiness in the miniseries, I would have by now, no matter how many times I've seen it. Like, you would think seeing it many times would bring those out even more, but still, I think for being limited to what you can show on TV and what you can't, and for condensing this into 3 hours, it's a pretty decent adaptation. There is, like, something you can't say about this new one that you can about the miniseries is, with the exception of language you can't say on TV, obviously, the dialogue is, like, verbatim. And so it's kind of baffling to me that so many people are talking about what a shitty adaptation the miniseries is, because it's really, I mean, obviously there's stuff like The House on Nabal Street, the stuff where you think it's so incredibly crucial, you're wondering how they could have cut it out. But I feel like that what they had to work with, they really made the story work. And like I said, it's not particularly scary. It has some effective moments, but that's not really, scariness wasn't what really drew me to it. So this one, on the other hand, so it's clearly going to be a different kind of outlook, and it definitely, even though it's the same story, seeing it in a totally different way, something that does, what's interesting about what this movie does is, I was saying that, weirdly enough, I feel like, as far as the content and the dialogue, when you kind of look at them, the miniseries almost might be more accurate as far as what's in here, despite all that's taken out. But the thing that this new one really does, and the way I think the reason it's being considered as a much better adaptation, is the fact that this book is such complete fucking insanity, and there's really only so much of that you can get out in a TV movie, and this movie just has that essence of the fear that you didn't really feel watching that, even if they still told the story relatively well. Watching this new movie basically feels like watching a nightmare transpire. And the thing about that is, our director is the guy that did Mama, which, kind of in the same sense as, what's his name, David Sandberg, that did Annabelle Creation and Lights Out, where he's a director where you can feel like he's definitely a unique voice in this genre, but he's also got to kind of work within the confines of what the studio will let him do. And I'm not sure what all they wanted to do that they couldn't, but from the looks of what we have here, it looks like they were, like, really damn lucky that the studio let them do as much as they did. And we as an audience are damn lucky for that, too. So the thing here is, starting with, this is one of those cases where it's pretty much from the get-go. Like, it's going to be pretty fast to let you know whether you're going to be drawn into this or not, or if it's just going to be okay or whatever. And the cinematographer is the guy that does Chan-wook Park's movies, or most of them anyway. So that was very appealing to me, and then pretty much as soon as it started, just even the sound of it is very, like, okay, I think this is going to be deeply unsettling, at least. At least. And so we begin with our famous, and obviously we're doing strictly the childhood aspect of it, with the people weren't sure about them going ahead and doing the sequel with the adults, but that seems to be the case here, because I think that was originally Fukunaga's plan, and then when he's still a credited writer, but when he left as a director, I think some news got out saying that it wasn't going to be 2 parts like he wanted, and that they were just going to kind of do this one and then leave it. But I think the clear success this is going to be had something to do with that, as well as it's a story that this movie could be probably left alone the way it is. But at the same time, it leaves you with just enough to want to see what they're going to do with that second half. So obviously we immediately start with the opening of the childhood scenes, which is Georgie in his boat. And it's one of those things that just you just kind of immediately feel like this isn't the kind of typical horror movie that we usually get. You kind of sense that immediately, whether it be the way it's shot, or the score, or the build-up, or any of that. And this moment, I really like the, I'm assuming this was intentional. We have opening credits, which I wasn't really expecting, which, they're not obviously particularly fascinating, they're just there. But the idea of Georgie drawing a smiley face on the window fog, and just as he makes the smiley faces when Bill Skarsgård's name comes up, I think that's kind of nice. And then going on this whole opening scene that is supposed to pull us in, literally, in Georgie's circumstance. This was pretty much going to be the total tone setter. Obviously, we pretty much already had it from the logos and through the credits, but I mean, this was going to be the moment that really decided where this movie was going to go. And I don't think a lot of people are going to be expecting just how much we go for it. Because obviously we all know how this plays out. It's just in detail what choices are going to be made, like what's going to be seen and what isn't. Well, the what isn't aspect isn't really here. It's all about what is shown. And the idea that you don't typically see, when you hear about, obviously there was that Eli Roth produced movie Clown we had recently that was basically this, or trying to be this. And I just found that movie really disgusting and unpleasant, especially with the way it handled its material, even though it was all in your face about it. That's what I didn't like about it, but the way it is when you look at this movie could be seen the same way, given this opening scene and what follows. But when it's done effectively, because Clown just kind of felt like it was exploiting that kind of content, whereas pretty much everything we see in this movie feels warranted and like it has a purpose for existing other than to just, make you feel unpleasant. That certainly plays a part, but still, it really just kind of sets up this whole thing. When we have, obviously, the build-up, but the thing here is that there's obviously going to be endless comparisons to the miniseries, so if you want to look at it from that sense, we have Tim Curry doing his thing where he basically seemed like a clown, like an actual clown. And the way I understand it, I read before going in, was that Skarsgård and the director were going to kind of take this approach to where it's like, Pennywise is not a human being. He's not even Pennywise. He's this completely otherworldly creature that is in, like, the farthest thing from human you could possibly be. And so that's how he was going to play him, where it doesn't seem like he's a clown that's, you know, trying to be friendly and then lure the kid in here. His main focus is to pretend that he's a person, which he is not. And you can kind of see him trying to make that facade, like I said, not just to lure him in and make him think he's a clown, but just to think he's a human in general. And that's the really creepy thing that this performance does. And the way he does, like, the drooling and how his teeth look really unnatural. And his fucking eyes are glowing. That's the first sight we get of him. And there's this moment, this really turning moment that I love, that reminded me a lot of something that Tim Curry does in the miniseries in a different scene. And that is the, when he's talking to Georgie in the sewer, and he's talking about popcorn, and he bets that popcorn's his favorite, and then they giggle together, and it's all happy, and then Pennywise just stops giggling. And Georgie, even the naive little boy that he is, realizes this is the moment, this is his clue. Oh, no, get away. And when we just see that abrupt change is the really startling thing. The scene it reminds me of in the miniseries, this one is probably more startling and creepy, but it's always remained to me one of the creepiest scenes in the miniseries, and it's the very first scene. The moment when the little girl's on her bike and she sees Pennywise in the sheets that are on the clothesline, and then for just a split, he's smiling and doing his clown thing, and then there's that one shot right before he attacks her when we just get a really quick shot of him in between the sheets, and his face is totally different than it was, and he looks angry and hungry and predatory. And this moment reminded me of that, but it's significantly more downplayed because in that it's just an abrupt change, but here we get to see the change happen. We get to see him smiling and laughing and just watch that fade out. And that's one of the really effective moments and really setting this scene that's going to be our tone setter for the whole movie, and it's creepy as fuck, which is exactly what it needs to be, and is in exactly the place that it needs to be. So, and then obviously they go the distance with what they show in this opening, and then that tells us everything. Now, going into it, now we meet, obviously, our Losers Club. Mainly, we start with Mike, but I feel like Mike kind of gets the shit end of the stick here, unfortunately, because he's the one that's usually got all the information. But they give that kind of trait to Ben, so that doesn't really leave Mike with anything to do except just kind of be present, which sucks because that was the thing, is everybody kind of had their thing, and I'm not quite sure where the decision came from to take Mike's thing away, but, so yeah, so I feel like they could have handled that a little better, but everything else works pretty much perfectly in this. And the thing, too, is obviously the kids are going to feel a little different than when you saw in the miniseries or the way you read about them in the book because of the time change. But that's kind of what I liked about it, is that you can still feel... The idea would have been not just to make them feel like they're from the 50s or whatever, but that now we're having this shift. They have to actually feel like they're children of the 80s, because children of the 50s and children of the 80s are clearly going to have different personalities, and they really did make that come through. Because of this, some of Richie's impressions and voices might seem a little dated, or like they're not in the right place. Like, they kind of carried over from the 50s aspect. But for the most part, it does work beautifully, and they all kind of bring out those... Obviously, they're not as, you know... What's the word I'm looking for? Conservative in regards to the kids in the 50s in the miniseries, or in the... Well, the book obviously went into this territory because they could. The idea that they're all going to be foul-mouthed and do all that stuff that kids aren't typically allowed to do... they will do when they're in groups with no adults around. And it all just kind of feels very real, and that's really the thing that matters here, because the whole idea of this story is that even though it's a clown, well, it's a thing that can shift into anything, but most notably a clown, the whole idea is how real it has to feel because of how real fear actually is, and that's what it is. So this is one of those movies where you can't necessarily just dismiss something that's kind of comes off unrealistic or unnatural because it's a horror movie, it's got monsters in it, what are you going to do? Because the whole foundation of this story is the realism of fear. So I thought they managed to tread that line very nicely without, going too much into the ridiculous. And which they very easily could have. And there is something I forgot to mention about that opening scene as well is this probably has been mentioned a lot by now, but it's just something that kind of occurred to me watching this scene today, and that was obviously, and I can't imagine it was on purpose, but it just kind of, for some reason, it kind of adds a bit of an eeriness to it that may not have been there with another actor. And the reason I say that is because Pennywise is played by Bill Skarsgård, and one of the first things Georgie says when he loses his boat is, "Bill's gonna kill me." So what Pennywise says to lure Georgie into the sewer is, "Take your boat, Bill's gonna kill you." It's almost like a warning because of the actor that plays him. I thought that kind of like I said, it was not intentional, obviously, but it just kind of adds a certain eeriness when you really think about it that way. That when you think about the actor playing him, which you really shouldn't because of the whole realism aspect, but if you are, it adds this whole other layer to it of like Pennywise warning him. But that's me overthinking it. So the thing that happened, and another thing going into their personalities, where everybody captures everything just right. Like, Richie in particular stands out. I know everybody loves this kid from Stranger Things, which I haven't watched yet. And the thing I thought he captured really, really well here was this idea that Richie has to constantly be talking, because we don't really get much of a backstory on him as we do the others, or at least know what his home life is like, strictly within the confines of this movie. And even though he's I'm not even quite sure if I can pinpoint what it is that he's doing, the actor, to show this off, but Richie has this way about him to where obviously he's the kid that has to constantly be joking and constantly be talking and all that. The one that always, they have a catch. This never really shows up except Pennywise's one line in this movie, but they even have their own catchphrase to shut him up. That's how much he won't stop talking. And the way you can just kind of tell that he's portrayed here, you can understand why Richie is this way, to where he's kind of, it's basically his facade, it's him basically trying to be really well-liked, but you can kind of tell that there's like an emptiness inside him that he's trying to compensate for. So I thought that was done really nicely, and then obviously this actress playing Bev is amazing. Her weirdly uncanny resemblance in both appearance and voice to Amy Adams, notwithstanding. It's like if you can't get her for the follow-up, that's a really missed opportunity. If I had to guess, they'll probably go Chastain because she was in Mama, but the thing here is the way they portray her in all these different ways, where we can kind of see her the way the girls at the beginning see her, where she seems to come from a really trashy place, and obviously the kind of person that her dad is, because they don't know what goes on in her life, they just see her as this trashy slut type. And if you were to not know her story, when we first see her, smoking in the girls' room, you can kind of probably get that vibe if you don't know where the character's going. But then at the same time, the way they portray her, the way the guys see her, when Bill first runs into her, and she just has that very angelic way about her. Pretty much everything Bev related was just really, really well done. The actress has a lot to do with that. And obviously, we'll be here all day if I go into all of them, but all the other actors also really bring something forth. But I thought Richie and Bev really stood out in a big way to the rest. That kid playing Eddie is really great too, of course. And Jane Leber obviously has a lot to do emotionally, and he seems to be the most experienced of them because I've actually seen him in other shit. And the thing here is that's actually something else I want to bring up real quick, is the casting choices. Obviously, the Losers Club and everything is great, and Skarsgård is great, but then there's the idea of not casting well-known people as the adults. Obviously, one reason for that is the fact that the adults have such a small part. The whole point is that it's almost like they barely exist in this world. But even so, there have been movies that do this to where they'll bring in actors that are still recognizable no matter how small the part is, because they just have to fill in the blanks and they want people with somewhat recognizable faces. I liked the way that it would have been distracting if you put relatively recognizable faces in these tiny parts, like, say, Bev's dad or Bill's dad or any of those, the creepy pharmacist. But I like the fact that they went with actors that you don't really, at least maybe I've seen them somewhere, but if it was, they were in such small parts, I don't remember seeing these faces before. So I thought that was effective, to going with the more unknown faces for the adult characters. So, as far as the scares go, the thing here is that I had heard some complaints that it was a very jump scare movie, and it is, but the thing that this movie does differently is that when you think about those jump scare movies, typically the jump part of it is where the scare ends. Like, that's kind of the scare's climax. And, like, once something jumps out at you, then it doesn't really matter what happens, and it's usually very quick and very abrupt. But the great thing about most of the jump scenes in this movie is the jump part is where the scene's fucking starting. It's like, the jump almost has nothing to do with it, it's what comes after. Because there's always something to follow up the big, jumpy aspects of it. And this gets so, and that's the thing too, is, like I said, it feels so different from the kind of horror movies we've been getting, because, like I said, they usually use the jump, and then whatever follows is just, a scary face, or somebody being chased briefly, but it's all over very fast. The scares in this movie are not over fast, a lot of them. And that's really important to how this movie feels, and that's the thing, is not only are they not over fast, but they're so goddamn intense. It might seem gimmicky that a lot of Pennywise's scares are him literally coming right at the camera, but it works in a really intense way. I don't know if it's just because of where I was sitting, because it was in a big theater and I usually take the back, but the back row was already full when I got there. So where I was directly in, like, the dead center of the theater. So that may have added to the intensity by itself, but it's just, the scares in this are so, you really do not see them this way in other movies, and how they're so relentless in how they do it too. And that's the thing too, is, the scares are going to come in rapid succession, because the whole idea is we have the whole Losers Club and all of them are going to get terrorized one at a time before they come to the conclusion that they're all being terrorized by the same thing. So the scares are going to be pretty much one scene right after the other for a long time. They do a good job of breaking that up a little bit. Like, it's not just everybody gets scared in one scene after the other. There are breaks in between before each one gets affected by this. And each time, it seems like, even the stuff that would seem ridiculous, like the painting, is it may seem a little Conjuring too. But at the same time, it's like, when Stan sees that picture, and it's this woman that clearly, like, it's not a human person because it's distorted and stuff like that, and the face is all messed up. So it's like, the reason this scare works, and the reason the creepy painting lady works, is because when Stan puts that picture back up and she's not there, it's kind of like, your mind starts to run and you kind of imagine, okay, what's the scare gonna be? Like, when he turns around, is Pennywise gonna be there? It's like, what exactly is it going to be? Is it just gonna be some loud noise or something? Because it runs through your head, well, we saw what that woman looked like in the painting. It's not like it could actually be her looking like she did in the painting, even though she's not in the painting anymore, so what's it gonna be? And it catches you off guard, because what she looks like in the painting, that's exactly what the fuck it is. And it throws you off guard because your mind kind of goes into, well, I know it can't be that. Yes, it can. And that really captures the whole idea of it and what it is and what it does. When it seems like what you're about to see is going to be the last thing you think it could be, because just how and why that just wouldn't be the case, right? Because I've seen horror movies before, and horror movies don't do that. Well, this movie begs to differ. And another thing here is stuff like Ben being chased by a headless body. This is one of those scenes where it's like, you just try to explain it, and it sounds so incredibly stupid. But when you see the way it's done, I love the reveal of going down the stairs, and then it's revealed the reason we keep not seeing his head is because it's not there. And like I said, that sounds like it could be ridiculous if you explain it, but the way what the body looks like and the way it moves, and this whole scene just feels so like it's coming right for you. And like the scare scenes are consistently like this. And then they just keep coming, and every one is just more intense and fucking crazy than the last. And it's stuff like that where it's like, you kind of wonder, when you hear about the fact that the scares are going to change from what they were in the book. Like, the idea that with Mike, we have the whole seeing Pennywise behind the blurriness waving at him with the glowing eyes. And it's like, that would seem overwhelming. Or that would seem underwhelming when you think about his run-in with it in the book, the giant bird. And that's the kind of the case to where it's like, I don't know, after you make the painting lady happen, my thought is, I could actually see them pulling off the giant bird. It would be difficult, but it was just so, like, the images that King puts in your head with this stuff, just saying it sounds so ridiculous, but the images he puts in your head make this stuff, and makes the fear so real. Like when Mike's in that, what is it, that dark tunnel, and the giant bird's coming at him, and he just has to defend himself with rocks and shit. And it's like, the way he describes Mike's fear, and the way he's thinking about how he's going to do this, makes it feel so real, almost like there's something in your life that you can relate to. Oh yeah, I didn't have to fight a giant bird that was just outside waiting for me, but I feel this. I feel something like this. I felt it before. And it's crazy to even try to explain, and that's where King's mastery really comes out with this story. And the way this movie is able to pull that off without using the exact same moments, like using just Pennywise lurking in a butcher shop instead of a giant bird. Like I said, it seems like such a different thing that it would be off-putting, but the way they handle it feels very much in line with what the rest of the movie's doing. And this movie is just so completely balls out insane. I don't think the giant bird would have been out of place, but I totally understand changing up what exactly happens to him. So, and then there's also stuff like that where it's like, there's stuff I would like to have seen. Like, I really would have, like, just the way he does this, the director pulls off this movie, even though the scares don't go as big and elaborate as, say, the time travel scene in the book, it makes me feel, he makes me feel watching this movie that he could have pulled that off. And it's like, it's just so fucking crazy, and it's like, I would have liked to have seen them try, but I understand why that scene wouldn't be in there, but it probably would have added a lot of confusion also, and a lot of hecticness to this already very long movie. But just the fact that I feel like he could have done that scene is almost satisfying enough than the fact that if he had actually tried. And that's really where this movie goes. And I also, sometimes the changes are for the better. I like the Patrick Hockstetter scene. I imagine we all know about this pretty much, so I'm probably going to go into spoilery territory. I'll have him mark that, but I figure we're all aware. The flying leeches thing, I get it. Like, it is a freaky concept, but given the big build-up we have to Hockstetter in the book, it kind of felt a bit underwhelming and anticlimactic. But I feel like how we don't know much about Hockstetter at all in the movie, but with enough build-up to him, I like the whole in the tunnel and the zombies and all that. It's definitely an effective enough scene, and probably works much better in the context of this movie than the flying leeches would have. And the whole idea of, like I said, it just feels so... The scares in this movie feel so relentless when they come, because it's like, you think about Patrick Hofstadter and you think flying leeches, and you're like, well, that seems a bit uncreative, that it's just some zombie kids and then Pennywise jumping out. But it's like, the scene still feels so incredibly intense regardless of that. And this whole thing, the Pennywise reveal, that fucking sound effect when we see the balloon, and you can hear, it's that sound effect of like the balloon stretching. And it's really, really intense stuff, and they really play. Like I said, this is going to be a movie that's really hard to describe to people, because it's this amazing stuff and this really freaky, intense shit throughout, relentlessly. But it's like, if you try to explain the scenes in this movie to people, they might think it sounds dumb. This is like, they just have to see it. Otherwise, yeah, that's the only way you can really experience this. So, just like kind of in the same way, it's kind of hard to experience what's in the book without actually reading it, because of the way King portrays fear in such a real way, regardless of the shit that's coming for you. Another thing that I liked that they touched on, I was kind of hoping a while back that they'd actually go into this, because I always thought it was one of the more intriguing aspects of the book, was the Eddie Corcoran story. It would have been very depressing, obviously, right in the middle of the movie, but at the same time, I like the way they incorporate it, and that's another thing, too, where it's like, it just seems like it's taking the ridiculous, where it's the creature from the Black Lagoon that rips his head off. And it's like, yeah, I can understand where that's done, but the build-up to that, and the fact that he sees his brother beforehand, the whole thing is just, yeah. But that's the thing, is the stuff that part of the book that's not even in the movie made me feel when he sees his little brother coming out of the water. There are scenes in this movie that still feel like that. And the fact that they were able to accomplish that without necessarily using the exact scenes, that's the huge strength of the movie here. And there is always time. There's always time for, you know, just little things character-wise. Like, obviously, it's very funny when the kids are interacting, regardless of the situation. And then there's just little things, just because. Like, that moment when Bev is up here, and the Losers Club shows up, and we watch her go all the way down the steps, and then by the time she gets to them, she's going to say something, and she tires out. And it's like, there's really no reason for that to be there, but I like that it is, because it's just kind of us relishing in the characters and adding these little things to them. Another one I liked was when something crucial happens, and they all kind of throw their bikes down to run towards it, and Stan's the one that lingers behind to put his kickstand so I just like little stuff like that. But then there's stuff where there's stuff that's here that's in the book, but in a totally different way, like Eddie's arm breaking, which really, yeah, it's a big build up to Henry Bowers and the gang and all that, the way it happens in the book. But then it's like, if you're gonna do the Eddie's arm breaking thing and you want to speed things up a little bit, the confrontation in the house on Neville Street is kind of perfect. That's actually quite a perfect idea, to just merge those things and say that's how it happened to him. And I do also like, I do feel like the thing about Pennywise was, I noticed that a lot of people are afraid that he's going to be like overused, and he isn't. Like, we see him a lot, but he's here so briefly. You kind of leave wanting more of him, because there are moments like that where, like when Mike's getting attacked by the Bowers gang, and Pennywise is sitting in a bush eating an arm and makes it wave, and then that's it. And then it's like, there are those moments like that to where it's like, whether they're big or whether they're small, like, it feels like any time in this movie Pennywise can just be there. And I really like the way they use that, to where it's like, you kind of crave more of him, but at the same time it makes you nervous, because you're like, it's kind of a be careful what you wish for thing, because pretty much any scene, no matter what the context, he can be there at any given time, and I think that's a really great way to handle him. Even though I think it's less that you want more of him and more of him kind of interacting, because I kind of like the moment to where, you'll notice if you want to compare it to Curry's performance, when you look at, not to say, like, there's really no reason to say whether one is better than the other because they're so different, but, and in such different contexts. But the idea of Curry's Pennywise taunting them to where it's almost like he's basically acting like a clown, like practical jokes and all that stuff. But he can still be threatening. When Pennywise is kind of antagonizing them in this, it just feels aggressive. Like, it feels really like he's just full of that hatred for children. And that these should not be living, breathing beings. These should be his fucking food, and that's all they're good for. Scaring the fuck out of them and eating them. That's all children exist for in his mind, and you really get that kind of vigorous way that he goes after them, even when he's just taunting them. Like, he's almost like, really, if you want to bring in the Bowers connection, it's like a bully, the way he plays him up. And then that moment when he's attacking Eddie, and he turns to Bill, and he fucking makes it personal. And it's like, I eat children and I hate children, but you specifically, Bill, I really want to get under your skin, with that comment. And it's like, it might feel very almost action movie villain, the way he says, you know, like, is this real enough for you? It was real enough for Georgie, haha. But it just feels so sadistic up to this point, to where you feel like that personal thing, because this really feels like Bill's journey, because this all kind of stems from the fact that Bill is in complete denial that Georgie is dead and wants to keep looking for evidence, or at least to find remains, something. And the way we kind of have that one moment here that makes it to where we can really tell that Bill is our main protagonist in this moment, despite the fact that we have a great ensemble and everybody's coming from a different direction. But it really kind of adds a heart to the story, especially when we get to the more emotional moments when Bill has to deal with this. That moment when he says that he'd rather go in the house on Neville Street than his own house. And it's like, it kind of catches you off guard, the emotional stuff like that, but that's always been here in the story, and this movie was able to put it in there in a way that, as good as it is, the miniseries had, but never quite captured in this way, in such a real way, and all this stuff working together. And that's the thing here, is that when you look at the relentless nature of the movie and how it goes about its scares, and it feels like, even though we can fit all this stuff in, all this great character stuff, it still feels constant because of how gigantic the scares are and how frequently they happen. And it's almost like, even though we've gone through all this character stuff and all this emotional stuff, and we really gather where these kids come from and how real they feel, when the next big scare comes, it still feels like the last one just happened. And it just feels relentless. And the thing that works here is, I was kind of getting, as far as its relentless nature, I was getting vibes of the Evil Dead remake by Fede Alvarez, and it was like, I kind of admired that movie because of just how non-stop it was, and its gruesomeness, and how it just really kind of took us in that. And we basically left that movie feeling like we were drenched in blood. But despite being able to accomplish that, it feels like that's all it accomplished. And because of that, I really didn't care for the movie. Like, I admire that. But here, we have basically that relentless nature of the Evil Dead remake, with these characters that we can love in the midst of it, and where they're all coming from and how real they feel, and just all the different things they go to that are relatable to any audience that's already been through their childhood, regardless of decade. And there's the stuff, like, obviously they're going through puberty. There's the scene where they admire Bev in her underwear, and then it's like, that could be seen as perverse, especially nowadays with, you know, everything being touchy, but but it definitely feels more, it feels less like that and more like, the way the kids admired Marley Shelton in The Sandlot is a lot more what it feels like, and it's a lot more akin to that kind of thing. And the way they kind of show off all of that, and just, like I said, it's all been said. Just the very real aspect of these characters amidst this story that feels so incredibly otherworldly and horror-like, I guess. I'm not quite sure What else I wanted to mention? My notes got a little... Oh, yes, the score. I mentioned the score at the beginning, but it continues, and there's one particular moment that I really loved. The crazy-ass fucking sink scene. Like, when I was in school and we would talk about the miniseries, there was this girl in my class, this was like 5th grade or something, and she had said the thing that scared her the most was the sink scene. I'd love to know how she feels about this. First off, I love the look of it. The way the blood takes up the entire room, and it covers the windows and the lights, so it makes everything in the room a red tint. That's fucking crazy looking. And then on top of the fact that I love the way the score works in this moment, because before the giant sing scene happens, she's reading the poem from Ben that we all know. And it's playing this music, and it's like nice, and it's like Bev falling in love because she thinks it's Bill, and so it's like this is basically her falling for Bill and realizing, oh, he likes me the way I like him, and it's this, nice moment where this girl falling in love or having a crush or whatever, and the music is portraying it that way, and then we hear the voices and we pan over to the sink, and that music literally dies like a scratching record and flows right into another piece that plays up the horror of the creepiness of what's coming out of the sink. And just in that one moment where it kind of shifts and when that happiness kind of dies is very good. There's the music choices can be interesting. There's the whole New Kids on the Block angle. That was a little weird. But then there's some stuff where it feels like the music might be a bit out of place. I feel like the Rock War, was done differently than I would have done it, with the music and the slow-mo and all that, but I do understand making it kind of, giving it this epic feel. But even so, but then there's stuff like, cleaning up the blood that could potentially seem out of place. I think that's a really great moment for the characters, and really, there's moments, like, those moments that I love, that mirror each other in the miniseries when they're building the dam, and then again when they're reconnecting at the Chinese restaurant. And that's, once again, it all feels stronger here. It really does. And that connection is definitely much more apparent, and the closeness as well. And it all just works in a beautiful way. And the thing about this is, we're talking about, the adult aspect of the miniseries and stuff like that, and how they're obviously with the Chapter 1 over the credits, it's clear we're going into Chapter 2, like it's already been greenlit and all that. The question now is just what the casting's going to look like. And the thing is that all we're doing is capturing the first half. This is just the childhood aspect. But the thing about it is, even without the second half attached, they've managed to make this movie feel massive and epic. Which really, really works in their favor. Like, you can say, like, if you don't know the story, I can see it maybe being a bit, like, people might think it's dragged out. I really love that we go into the, Henry being coaxed into killing his dad. I love that whole TV angle. It reminded me of the Alison Pill scene in Snowpiercer. And then, and how it kind of shows Pennywise's return into the story when they kind of thought they might have possibly beat him there. The way he just comes back kind of adds to that relentless nature that's through the whole movie. But the thing here is that it just really has this very sweeping feel, and then obviously we get to our climax. And the thing about this is that this is when it shows, obviously, as I've been talking about, the way the scares really, really go for it and feel really, really aggressively intense and right in your face, literally. It's clear that this movie is going above and beyond the way we've known modern horror movies to be. And then you look at the climax, and then it's like I said, this isn't even technically our climax, this is just our midway point, but it's like that spider climax that disappointed everybody. Everybody that was disappointed by that spider climax to the original story, they get the climax they deserve here. And it really gets to play up what it does, and we really, really get to see that in a way that you would imagine is unfilmable. and this movie is able to pull it off, and it is so fucking grand. In its presentation, what it's able to pull off, and all that. So yes, obviously it's getting overwhelmingly good reviews. There are some people that think it's okay, but for the most part, the people that are passionate are really, really passionate, and that's coming from a real place. So I will be interested. I know even book readers say the adult aspect is not as good as the childhood aspect. I guess we will see what they can do. They have a lot to live up to, where it's almost like there has to be somebody at Warner Brothers saying, I know we're like super, super successful. I know we set it up. I know there's a second part to this story, but I mean, really, we could end here. We could end on this high, and would be okay. So I am really interested to see what they do. Once again, since we're making changes now, and we're taking out some stuff that you would kind of like to see, but putting in stuff you didn't know you wanted until you saw it. I'll be very interested to see what they continue to do. So it's all very exciting. So yes, this was very satisfying. I heard one critic describe it as, if you see it with a crowd, it's basically like being on an amusement park ride. That's about right. Friday afternoon, there aren't usually that many people. There kind of were today, and you could kind of get that sense. Like I said, I had a whole back row full behind me, so yes, it's obviously going to be a blast for anybody that's into this kind of thing. And like I said, it just takes what we know modern horror movies to be lately, and just really just takes it as far as it can go under a studio's name. And it's nice and big and grand, and like I said, we know we're only halfway there, so hopefully they don't let us down. So I think that's what we're looking at here. Next week we have Mother. I heard it, there's a very overzealous trailer for Mother on it saying next week you'll remember the first time you ever saw Mother, like it's going to be some traumatizing thing for all of us. I don't know, we'll see, but and then yeah, so a bunch of stuff to look forward to. So in the meantime, that's it.